You are just jealous of my daughter because you cannot have one of your own. My sister-in-law screamed across the dining room right after her child ruined the family dinner, and she blamed it entirely on me. You have exactly two choices right now. My mother-in-law, the undisputed matriarch and founder of the family business, ordered as she slammed her hand onto the table. Apologize immediately or leave my house. I looked over at my husband, desperately waiting for him to defend me. He stayed completely silent, calmly slicing his steak and serving himself more food as if I did not even exist. They fully expected me to break down and beg for their forgiveness. Instead of apologizing, I booked a one-way ticket. When they finally realized I had actually left, their faces went completely pale. Welcome back to revenge mode. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember that people who mistake your patience for weakness always learn their lesson the hard way. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a dramatic story. My name is Zelda. I am a 32-year-old senior software engineer. For 6 long years, I was the invisible backbone of my mother-in-law's marine biotechnology startup based in Tampa, Florida. I spent countless sleepless nights writing the complex core code and meticulously maintaining the massive data systems that kept their entire empire running. Even though I was the beating heart of their operation, her family consistently ignored my existence. Instead, they proudly paraded my husband around, giving him full credit for the flawless software architecture I built from scratch. I swallowed my pride because I thought we were building a family legacy. I was completely wrong. The annual dinner began exactly at 7 o'clock inside the grand bayfront mansion owned by Jean, my mother-in-law. The massive dining room echoed with loud voices and the clinking of expensive crystal. John sat at the head of the long table, controlling the entire room like a ruthless dictator. She demanded absolute attention from everyone present. As the servers delivered the main course, she raised her glass and focused her attention entirely on Tristan, my husband. To Tristan? Jean announced loudly, forcing the entire room to stop talking and listen. We all know exactly how many long nights you stayed awake coding this month. The recent database migration was completely flawless. You are carrying this entire marine biotechnology company on your back. We are all incredibly proud of your technical genius and leadership. I sat rigidly next to him, staring down at my hands. I was the person who stayed awake for 3 consecutive weeks. I wrote every single line of that complex architecture while Tristan slept soundly in our bedroom. Tristan did not correct his mother. He smiled brightly, raised his own glass, and graciously accepted the applause. He happily consumed my hard work without a single ounce of guilt. I swallowed the bitter injustice and remained completely silent, foolishly prioritizing family harmony over my own professional recognition. I told myself it did not matter, but the resentment burned deeply inside me. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy and suffocating. Moments later, the real chaos erupted. Audrey, my sister-in-law, allowed her young daughter to sprint wildly around the formal dining table. The child ran in rapid circles, completely ignoring the servers carrying hot food. Suddenly, she collided violently with the back of my heavy wooden chair just as I lifted my glass. The sudden impact jerked my arm forward. A huge splash of dark red wine flew through the air and soaked directly into the front of my white silk dress. The cold liquid ruined the expensive fabric instantly. I gasped softly and quickly grabbed a cloth napkin to contain the mess. I naturally expected a basic apology. A normal parent would immediately apologize and help clean the spill. Audrey did the exact opposite. She rushed forward, aggressively snatched her daughter away, and slammed both of her hands flat against the solid oak table. "Watch your face!" Audrey yelled furiously, glaring at me with pure hatred. "You deliberately glared at her. You intentionally terrified my child just because she accidentally bumped your seat." The entire room went completely dead silent. Everyone stopped eating. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to remain highly rational. "Audrey, I did not glare at anyone," I stated calmly, dabbing the ruined silk. "She was running incredibly fast. It was just an accident. Nobody is upset." My calm, logical tone acted like gasoline thrown onto an open fire. Audrey's face turned violently red. She lost complete control, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Do not ever speak to me about how children behave," she shrieked, her voice cracking with intense malice. "You sit there silently judging my parenting because you are completely incapable of being a mother. 6 years of marriage and you have given this family absolutely nothing. You are just bitterly jealous of my daughter because you cannot have one." The vicious words hit me like a physical strike to the chest. It was the most invasive, cruel insult imaginable. My vision blurred slightly, but I refused to shed a single tear. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Tristan. This was the exact moment a real partner would stand up, silence his sister, and demand immediate respect for his wife. I stared at the side of his face, waiting for him to speak. Tristan did not even look up from his plate. He picked up his silver knife and fork, meticulously sliced a small piece of his steak, and placed it into his mouth. The metallic scrape of his knife against the porcelain plate echoed loudly in the quiet room. He chose his dinner over my dignity. Desperate for any sign of basic human decency, I glanced across the table at Harold. My father-in-law. Harold stared intensely at his lap, physically shrinking in his large chair. He sat completely frozen, terrified of angering his dominant wife and unhinged daughter. He possessed absolutely zero authority in his own home. He heard the horrific insults, saw my ruined dress, and chose to remain completely mute. He cowardly allowed Jean and Audrey to trample me entirely. I sat surrounded by cowards, completely abandoned by the people I spent years trying to save. The metallic scrape of Tristan's knife suddenly stopped. Before anyone else could speak, Jean slammed her heavy crystal water glass down onto the solid oak table. The loud crash echoed sharply across the room, making the hired servers flinch and step quickly back against the walls. Jean stood up slowly from her chair, towering over the dining arrangement with absolute authority. She pointed a rigid finger directly at my face, her eyes cold and completely unforgiving. She did not care about the truth or the spilled wine. She only cared about asserting total dominance and protecting her bloodline at all costs. "You have exactly 2 choices right now," Jean ordered, her voice cutting through the tense air like a razor blade. "You will stand up, walk around this table to Audrey, and apologize immediately for your unacceptable behavior. You will beg for her forgiveness in front of this entire family. Or you will pack your belongings and leave my house this instant. I will not tolerate this level of disrespect toward my daughter under my own roof." I shifted my gaze across the table to Harold, desperately hoping the patriarch would intervene. He nervously adjusted his collar and actively avoided making eye contact with me. He looked absolutely terrified of his own wife. "Yes," Harold stammered weakly, his voice barely louder than a forced whisper. "Yes, she is completely right. You really should just listen to your mother. Please do not make this situation any worse than it already is." He surrendered his dignity instantly, completely validating the completely false accusations against me, just to avoid becoming Jean's next verbal target. The betrayal from my in-laws was entirely predictable. The fatal blow came directly from the man I married. Tristan finally put his silver fork down onto his plate and sighed heavily. He looked incredibly annoyed by the inconvenience of my public humiliation. He did not look angry at his sister for viciously attacking my medical history. He looked completely exhausted by my refusal to instantly submit to her unhinged rage. "Just apologize and get it over with," Tristan muttered coldly, casually wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Stop causing a massive scene. You are wildly overreacting to nothing. Just say you are sorry to Audrey right now, so we can all finish our dinner in peace." Those exact words shattered our 6-year marriage into a million irreparable pieces in a fraction of a second. He did not yell. He did not hit me. He simply chose his own comfort over my absolute destruction. He demanded I kneel to his abusive sister so he could comfortably finish eating his expensive steak without further interruption. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not waste a single breath arguing with people deeply committed to misunderstanding me. The overwhelming grief instantly evaporated quickly, replaced by a deep, freezing clarity. I looked around the large table at the arrogant matriarch, the vengeful sister, the cowardly father, and the utterly pathetic husband. I smiled softly. It was a genuine, relaxed smile that visibly unsettled everyone sitting in the room. I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate, pushed my chair back, and stood up gracefully. I did not utter a single word of defense. I simply turned around and walked straight up the grand staircase. I entered the guest bedroom and immediately pulled my large suitcase from the closet. I moved with clinical precision, quickly folding my clothes and gathering my personal items. I opened my work laptop to hastily transfer my personal files before shutting the machine down completely. As the screen brightened, a new notification popped up in my corporate inbox. It was a highly confidential internal company memo drafted by Jean, carelessly copied to my secondary administrative email address. I quickly opened the message and read the short paragraph. The memo formally announced a major executive restructuring plan. Starting the following Monday, Audrey would officially take over the entire technical division. Jean had secretly promoted her completely unqualified daughter to replace me as the head of the software department. The sudden conflict downstairs was never about spilled wine or child discipline. It was a highly calculated, premeditated assassination of my professional character. They deliberately engineered this massive public argument to force me out of the company, while simultaneously framing me as the unstable aggressor. They desperately wanted my complex code, my automated system, and my relentless hard work, but they wanted to hand the official executive title directly to Audrey. They firmly believed I would just cry, accept the humiliating demotion, and continue doing all the actual labor behind the scenes forever. Immediately after reading that highly confidential email, I opened my corporate laptop back up and began executing my final exit strategy. I refused to leave any loose ends that Jean could weaponize against me in a federal courtroom. I connected directly to the central company servers using my encrypted credentials. Moving with absolute calculated precision, I uploaded every single line of my updated source code into the main company repository. I meticulously transferred all the proprietary data algorithms, the automated marine environmental tracking scripts, and the complex core database architectures. I deliberately organized and deposited highly detailed technical documentation files because I wanted my hands completely clean. I strictly followed standard American corporate protocols to legally protect myself from any future malicious sabotage accusations. Once the massive data transfer successfully finished, I drafted an urgent high-priority message to the internal technology security team. I explicitly instructed them to immediately revoke my supreme administrative privileges across all software platforms. I formally surrendered my digital access to the remote cloud infrastructure, the physical server rooms, and the highly classified marine biology client data partitions. I explicitly demanded an automated system receipt confirming that my digital footprint within the startup was permanently erased and completely locked. By willingly locking myself out of the entire secure network, I successfully neutralized any future attempts by Jean or Audrey to legally blame me for their inevitable technical failures. Next, I opened a blank email addressed directly to the Human Resources Department, officially copying Jean in her capacity as the Chief Executive Officer. I kept the digital message incredibly brief, legally precise, and brutally professional. I officially stated my formal resignation from my essential position as senior software engineer. Operating strictly under the at-will employment laws heavily governing the state of Florida, I legally declared my permanent departure effective immediately. I specifically waived any rights or obligations regarding a standard 2-week notice period. I hit send instantly, severing my professional ties to the toxic corporate empire I personally built from absolutely nothing. I carefully wiped the company laptop completely clean of my personal passwords, shut it down securely, and placed it neatly on the wooden guest desk. I turned my immediate attention to my personal cellular phone. I opened a commercial airline application and quickly booked a premium one-way ticket directly to New York. For several long years, elite corporate recruiters from massive global technology conglomerates had desperately tried to poach me. I always politely declined their incredibly generous financial offers because I foolishly believed I owed my unwavering loyalty to my husband's family business. That entirely misplaced loyalty was now completely dead. I grabbed my fully packed suitcase, zipped the heavy fabric shut, and pulled the cold metal handle up. Before leaving the quiet bedroom, I opened my digital contact list to execute the most deeply satisfying task of the entire night. I navigated straight to Gene's profile and pressed block. I scrolled down to Harold and permanently blocked his number. I blocked Audrey without a single second thought. I then found the contact profile for Tristan's deeply entitled and completely useless younger brother, Dylan. I firmly blocked him too, aggressively ensuring the entire toxic bloodline was permanently cut off from my private existence. Finally, I stared at Tristan's name glowing on my bright screen. The man who confidently promised to protect me had just traded my dignity for a quiet steak dinner. I pressed the red block button, digitally erasing my cowardly husband from my life. I grabbed my car keys and rolled my suitcase quietly down the back staircase. The grand luxury house was still brightly lit. I could clearly hear the faint, muffled sounds of loud laughter and clinking crystal glasses echoing continuously from the dining room. They were still blindly celebrating their supposed victory, completely unaware that their entire digital infrastructure was now resting entirely in the deeply incompetent hands of Audrey. I slipped silently out the heavy side door into the warm Florida night. I loaded my heavy luggage into the trunk of my car, started the engine, and drove away from the massive bayfront mansion. I merged onto the empty highway, driving steadily toward the international airport, leaving the shattered wreckage of my toxic marriage far behind in the dark rearview mirror. 3 days after my arrival in New York, the highly sensitive environmental sensors deployed across the Florida coastline simultaneously lost their synchronization. The complex tracking system I built required extremely precise manual calibration commands every single morning to accurately process the massive influx of oceanic data. Without my daily algorithmic adjustments, the central database immediately began rejecting all incoming telemetry. The automated digital failsafes triggered one by one, cascading rapidly into a massive operational failure that completely paralyzed the entire coastal monitoring network. Inside the main corporate office in Tampa, Audrey sat behind my former desk, proudly occupying her brand new executive role as Chief Technology Officer. Her unearned arrogance evaporated the exact second the massive digital dashboard mounted on the office wall flashed violently red. Piercing warning sirens blared repeatedly through the internal computer speakers. Critical system error notifications flooded her main monitor, stacking rapidly over each other until the large screen became a chaotic, blinding mess of severe warnings. Audrey frantically grabbed the computer mouse, clicking randomly on alert windows she fundamentally did not understand. The incredibly arrogant woman who viciously slandered me at a formal dinner now stared blankly at thousands of lines of highly complex Python architecture. The intricate software code looked exactly like an alien language to her completely untrained eyes. She desperately opened the comprehensive technical documentation folders I legally left behind, but her severe lack of basic software engineering knowledge rendered the highly detailed instructions entirely useless. She began sweating profusely, her hands shaking violently as she frantically hammered the mechanical keyboard, blindly entering incorrect administrative commands and accidentally corrupting vital configuration files in her rapidly escalating panic. The internal technical disaster quickly evolved into a massive external crisis. 3 major marine biology research institutes simultaneously lost all access to their vital real-time environmental data streams. High-paying corporate clients immediately flooded the main company switchboard with furious phone calls. Urgent emails demanding immediate technical support crashed the overloaded corporate inbox. Angry project managers and aggressive corporate lawyers repeatedly threatened to invoke the strict financial penalty clauses explicitly written into their service-level agreements. The prestigious startup was rapidly bleeding credibility and money by the minute. And the newly appointed technical executive had absolutely no idea how to stop the catastrophic bleeding. Jean forcefully kicked open the heavy glass door of the technology department, her face twisted in pure, uncontrollable rage. She demanded an immediate, detailed explanation for the catastrophic system failure, actively destroying her business. Audrey sat entirely frozen in the expensive leather chair, stammering incoherently, while pointing a trembling finger at the glowing red warning screens. Jean quickly realized her deeply favored daughter possessed absolutely zero ability to actually resolve the escalating crisis. The pathetic illusion of Audrey's technical competence shattered instantly under the crushing weight of real corporate responsibility. "Call her right now!" Jean aggressively commanded Tristan, who stood nervously in the office doorway watching the absolute disaster unfold in real time. "Call your wife and order her to log into the remote server. I do not care what lies you have to tell her. Beg her if you must. Tell her to fix this massive mess immediately before we lose our biggest commercial contracts." Tristan frantically pulled out his cellular phone with trembling hands and quickly dialed my personal number. He held the expensive device tightly against his ear, desperately waiting for the familiar ringtone to connect him to his savior. He foolishly believed I would eagerly answer his call, ready to serve him once again. Instead, he heard the cold, unforgiving automated voice of the telecom provider, stating the number was permanently unreachable. Tristan swallowed hard, the color rapidly draining from his face, and quickly dialed the number again. The automated rejection played flawlessly. Absolute panic washed over his pale features. Audrey desperately grabbed her own cellular phone and tried calling my number, but her urgent call dropped the exact second she pressed the dial button. Jean aggressively snatched a heavy desk phone from the console and furiously punched in my digits, only to be instantly disconnected by a loud, piercing tone. They stood closely together in the glowing red light of the failing server room, staring at their dead devices in absolute horror. The devastating, undeniable reality finally crashed down heavily on all of them. They were completely blocked, entirely locked out of my new life, and permanently trapped inside a rapidly sinking ship with absolutely no one left to save them. By the second week of the escalating crisis, Jean authorized an emergency wire transfer of hundreds of thousands of dollars to immediately secure an elite team of independent software consultants. The highly paid engineers rushed into the Tampa headquarters and bypassed the frantic executive team to access the primary server room. They spent 12 consecutive hours analyzing the locked source code repositories, reviewing the paralyzed network logs, and attempting to trace the complex digital architecture I legally left behind. Audrey confidently attempted to shadow them aggressively, throwing around meaningless technical buzzwords to assert her unearned authority. The lead consultant completely ignored her desperate performance. When he finally emerged from the freezing server room, his expression was completely grim. He demanded an immediate private meeting with Jean and bluntly delivered the devastating reality. He explicitly confirmed that the system architecture was a highly sophisticated, custom-built masterpiece. He then pointed directly at Audrey and stated that the newly appointed technical executive possessed absolutely zero fundamental technology skills. The expert estimated that completely reverse engineering the massive database, without the original creator navigating the complex logic, would require his entire team to work for several uninterrupted months. That brutal professional assessment completely destroyed Jean's carefully constructed illusions of control. She forcefully dragged Audrey into the main glass conference room, aggressively slamming the heavy door shut. Jean unleashed a terrifying verbal assault on her deeply favored daughter. She screamed loud enough for the entire corporate office floor to hear, aggressively mocking Audrey's pathetic incompetence and blaming her directly for the massive financial hemorrhage. Jean demanded immediate operational results, threatening to publicly strip Audrey of her executive title and completely cut off her lavish personal trust fund if the environmental tracking network remained offline for another day. She mercilessly reminded Audrey that her massive arrogance had driven away the only person capable of running the family empire. The vicious public humiliation absolutely shattered Audrey's massive ego. She could not accept the undeniable fact that she was entirely inferior to the woman she aggressively bullied and humiliated at a family dinner. Driven by pure desperation and blinding pride, Audrey made a deeply foolish decision. Instead of waiting for the professional consultants to safely reconstruct the digital pathways, she secretly logged back into the primary control terminal while the engineering team took a short meal break. She navigated blindly through the complex administrative directories until she found the master configuration panel controlling the remote oceanic sensors. She wildly assumed she could manually force the entire network to synchronize by executing a global system override to prove to her furious mother that software engineering was an incredibly simple task. Without understanding a single line of the underlying algorithms, Audrey rapidly typed a series of crude command prompts and aggressively slammed the Enter key. She completely ignored the flashing security warnings demanding secondary authorization. Her reckless command forcefully bypassed the built-in safety protocols and pushed an entirely incorrect calibration metric to every single underwater sensor deployed along the Florida coast. The central system did not crash. Instead, it did something infinitely worse. The hardware rebooted and immediately began transmitting heavily corrupted telemetry directly into the live databases of their highest-paying clients. Audrey watched the screen light up with green confirmation checks, falsely believing she had single-handedly saved the company. She possessed absolutely no idea that she had just initiated an irreversible digital self-destruct sequence. The incoming automated data stream was absolute garbage. The scrambled oceanic readings instantly contaminated years of highly sensitive marine biology research. Water temperature metrics registered at biologically impossible levels, and salinity algorithms produced completely randomized output that actively overwrote stable historical data. The prestigious research institutes realized the catastrophic data breach within minutes. The corporate fallout was swift and absolutely brutal. Official legal notices flooded the corporate inbox before the afternoon ended. The furious clients invoked the emergency penalty clauses deeply embedded in their service-level agreements and simultaneously suspended every single active commercial contract. They completely withdrew their financial support and legally blocked any further data transmission, declaring the company utterly incapable of maintaining basic operational integrity. The lucrative corporate empire was bleeding out, entirely destroyed by one arrogant keystroke from a completely unqualified executive. 3 months passed since that disastrous formal dinner, and Jean's massive executive office was completely buried under a mountain of official legal documents. The catastrophic data corruption triggered a relentless avalanche of severe corporate lawsuits. Major marine biology institutes and powerful commercial clients aggressively sued the company for massive financial damages. The furious plaintiffs explicitly cited catastrophic breaches of their strict service-level agreements, refusing any desperate offers of mediation. They submitted extensive documentation proving the corrupted telemetry permanently ruined years of highly sensitive oceanic research. The aggressive corporate lawyers demanded millions of dollars in immediate financial compensation, ruthlessly attacking the highly vulnerable startup from every possible legal angle. The rapid influx of massive lawsuits instantly terrified the corporate financial institutions currently backing the startup. Recognizing the undeniable impending collapse, the major banks moved aggressively to protect their own financial assets. They immediately froze every single commercial credit line and entirely locked the primary operational accounts. Jean frantically called her elite banking representatives, aggressively demanding immediate access to her own corporate funds. But the bankers coldly refused her demands. The once lucrative technology empire suddenly possessed absolutely zero capital to pay the remaining employees, hire expensive defense attorneys, or even keep the physical office lights turned on. Backed entirely into a desperate corner with absolutely no remaining financial options, Jean was forced to swallow her massive pride. She sat alone in her dark office and reluctantly signed the deeply humiliating federal paperwork to officially file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The massive corporate empire she ruthlessly built on my stolen labor was completely gone. The devastating corporate bankruptcy immediately severed the endless flow of unearned wealth that funded the family's incredibly lavish personal lifestyle. The brutal reality of their new financial ruin struck Dylan first. He casually attempted to pay a massive bar tab at an exclusive downtown nightclub, only to watch the bartender publicly decline his premium credit card. Enraged and deeply humiliated in front of his wealthy friends, Dylan stormed directly back to the Bayfront mansion. He violently kicked the heavy front door open and went on an absolute uncontrollable rampage through the main hallway. He aggressively flipped a heavy glass dining table, shattering expensive antique vases against the walls and completely destroying the formal living room where they once proudly humiliated me. He cornered Audrey near the grand staircase, screaming violently at his terrified sister. Dylan viciously blamed her completely unchecked arrogance for single-handedly destroying the lucrative family business. He aggressively cursed her for permanently cutting off his endless trust fund allowance, wildly throwing a heavy wooden chair across the room to emphasize his explosive rage. He explicitly reminded Audrey that her desperate need to play the brilliant technology executive officially turned them all into completely broke jokes. Audrey physically collapsed onto the cold hardwood floor, weeping hysterically, as her brother continued his aggressive, relentless verbal assault. The highly entitled woman who boldly demanded my immediate apology just months ago now sat completely broken, entirely defenseless, and utterly alone. She finally realized she had permanently transitioned from her mother's highly favored golden child into the ultimate family villain. Her profound technological incompetence had officially destroyed their massive generational wealth in a matter of days, completely erasing their privileged social status within the affluent Florida community. She desperately looked around the ruined living room for any sign of emotional support from her parents or brothers, but she found absolutely nothing. Harold, staying completely true to his deeply cowardly nature, entirely abandoned his family during their darkest hour. The terrified patriarch locked himself securely inside his private home office, aggressively consuming expensive whiskey and entirely refusing to face the harsh reality. He actively ignored the massive bankruptcy lawyers repeatedly calling his personal cellular phone. He deliberately chose to hide in a dark alcoholic haze rather than confront the terrifying financial disaster his dominant wife and arrogant daughter successfully created. The deeply toxic family structure rapidly consumed itself. For 6 long years, they successfully maintained their fake unity by constantly projecting their collective failures and vicious anger directly onto me. Without their primary scapegoat physically present to absorb their relentless abuse, they instantly turned their vicious fangs completely on each other. The massive mansion entirely devolved into a miserable war zone of profound financial despair, violent arguments, and endless regret. The doors of the Florida family court swung open. Zelda stepped into the hallway radiating power. She commanded the space, standing as a newly appointed CTO in New York. Waiting near the elevators were Jean and Tristan. Jean's posture sagged. Her company was a dead shell suffocating under Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Tristan stood beside her, abandoning his ego. His arrogance vanished, replaced by pure desperation. They blocked Zelda before she could reach the exit. Tristan spoke first, his voice breaking. He begged her to return. Jean stepped forward, swallowing her pride. She frantically promised Zelda massive company shares, pleading with her to fix the system and pull them from ruin. They lowered their heads, begging for salvation. Zelda did not flinch. She stared at them. "What you lost wasn't a software engineer," Zelda stated, her voice slicing through the silence. You lost the only person who silently kept this entire family from collapsing. Jean choked on a sob, reaching out a hand. Tristan froze, the weight of reality crushing him instantly. Zelda did not hesitate. She turned her back and walked away. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside and pressed the button. The metal doors shut abruptly. Zelda severed the tie forever.